Hello and welcome to the virtual Waterfront Walking Tour. My name is Rachel Easton with Harbor WildWatch. Together with the Harbor History Museum and the Downtown Waterfront Alliance, we have partnered to bring you this Waterfront Walking Tour for the past 6 years. Because of the current situation in our world, this year's tours will be brought to you virtually via Facebook and YouTube. You can tune in to learn more about the different stops from 2 of our most popular tours, Skiffs to Spirits and Wonders of the Waterfront. Today I will be your guide for a segment of the Wonders of the Waterfront tour. I'm particularly fond of this tour because it explores the incredible wildlife and the natural resources that we have here in Gig Harbor's past and present. A quick caveat: even though I am super passionate about Gig Harbor and I've lived here a long time, please remember that I'm not a historian and it's simply not possible to cover everything about Gig Harbor on each stop. But if you'd like to share your stories or drop some knowledge related to this stop, feel free to write those in the comments section. You're also welcome to ask us questions and we'll do our best to answer them. Today we're going to talk about Donkey Creek Park, but before we get started, I would like to take a moment and recognize that we are on the traditional lands of the Puyallup people and the speakers of the Southern Lushootseed language since time immemorial. The name for the Puyallup people in Lushootseed is Spoyalapapsh, which means generous and welcoming to all people. We acknowledge these people as the keepers of the land and pay our respects to them. Let's begin. We are standing in what is now Donkey Creek Park, but this place has been many different things throughout its history. Before this, it was the site of a utility company. Before that, a lumber yard, a sawmill, a school, even a native village. And I want you to imagine that you've been transported back 1,000 years in time. Picture the tall cedar, hemlock, and fir trees towering above you. Imagine the sound of the creek bustling with so many salmon you could walk across it on their backs. Smell the scent of the low tide and the incredible bounty that it brings. Imagining all that, it's no wonder that the native people chose to live here. But why has this area so incredibly rich and biodiverse? It all comes down to the relationship between trees and salmon. Let's talk about the trees first. The presence of trees like these towering Douglas fir trees and western red cedars were a good reason to establish a longhouse at this particular site. Trees provide people with shelter, medicine, utensils, canoes, even clothing. Douglas fir are identified by their single needles, about 1 inch in length, and the cones with their 3-pronged brack, which resembles a mouse tail and hind legs. The western red cedar are characterized by overlapping needles, small cone clusters, fibrous bark, and a trunk that widens at the base. Cedar is resistant to rot and insect damage and is incredibly significant to all coastal native people. Both of these trees can live over 1,000 years. Now let's talk about salmon. Once abundant in this stream, salmon were and continue to be a critical part of culture of the native people, the European settlers, and the current residents of this area. This creek is a short one, which originates from the wetlands north of here, near the roundabout at Borgen Boulevard. These conditions, short creeks with less capacity, favor chum salmon, which are the second largest salmon species in the Pacific Northwest, behind the Chinook or the king salmon. Salmon are what we call anadromous fish, meaning they begin and end their life in fresh water, but they spend the majority of their lives in the ocean. The chum salmon in this creek begin their life cycle as a tiny egg down in the gravel. Once they hatch, they're about as big as these little fir needles, equipped with a little yolk sac to nourish them. They bury their heads into the gravel and absorb their yolk sac and avoid being swept downstream. Once their yolk sac is used up, it's time to eat, and the first thing they do is shoot to the surface to grab a mouthful of air and inflate their swim bladders. Depending on the species, they spend between a month to a couple years in the freshwater before heading out to the estuary and ultimately to the Pacific Ocean. Once there, the goal is to get as fat and as healthy, as strong as they can be. The bigger they are, the more reproductive success that they can have. After 3 to 5 years at sea, they return to the very stream where they hatched, but not without another transformation. Their colors change, their noses become hooked, their teeth grow, and their backs become humped. Their journey complete, they then spawn and die. So how are trees and salmon connected? Tree trunks and branches provide shade for the stream, which keeps the water cool. Tree roots control erosion by stabilizing the banks of the stream. Fallen trees and branches create resting pools for tired salmon to use when making their arduous spawning journey back home. As many of you know, salmon die naturally after the spawning process. In addition to being eaten by other animals such as bear, raccoon, fox, birds of prey, the fish that are left behind to decompose provide rich marine nutrients that enable these trees to grow. Trees growing beside salmon-bearing streams grow 3 times faster than the equivalent tree on a non-salmon-bearing stream. But salmon aren't the only thing that benefit from the access to plentiful trees in Gig Harbor. In fact, the trees fed the burgeoning of 2 industries near the turn of the century in Gig Harbor: lumbering and boat building. The name of this park originates from one of those industries. The donkey engine was a machine designed to lift, drag, and move logs from their stump to the accumulation point. They were also used to load logs on cars that transported logs to distant mill sites. Prior to the invention of the donkey engine, logs had to be moved by gravity or brute force, usually in the form of hand labor or by using teams of oxen or horses. Though invented in California, the advent of the steam-powered donkey engine made high-volume, mechanized logging possible, thus ushering in an era of large-scale logging and lumbering during the early years of the 20th century. Word has it that the city of Gig Harbor has acquired an old donkey engine that will be displayed here at the park soon. As I'm sure you can already tell, the use of natural resources is an important part of the history and culture of downtown Gig Harbor. Because of this, the community has tried to celebrate these ties by restoring and repurposing a number of historic properties. Donkey Creek was restored to its natural flow only a few years ago in 2013. For 60 years before that, the creek and the salmon that swam up it were contained to a 33-inch culvert buried under the roadway. The daylighting of the creek significantly restored the habitat that our local salmon need to survive. Now, rather than swimming through a concentrated stream of fast-moving water for 300 feet, fish can freely swim up this channel. But this site is still a work in progress. Volunteers remove invasive plant species several times a year and monitor the salmon spawning in the creek each November and December. That's it for our tour today. Thank you so much for joining us on our exploration of Donkey Creek. Be sure to tell your family, friends, and anyone thinking of visiting Gig Harbor to watch these videos and learn a little bit more about our beautiful waterfront and how we are all, past and present, tied to the water.